Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are going through the first part of the Synthesis of Yoga, the Yoga of Divine Works. We are on the third chapter, Self Surrender in Works, the Way of the Gita. And those who are new, you can find link to this chapter in the description. I would highly recommend you to follow the text so that we can read together, dive together into Sri Aurobindo's world. In the last episode, Sri Aurobindo was bringing in the distinction made by the Sankhya system of philosophy in India, which was accepted by all the schools of spiritual explorations in India. This distinction is of a mechanical prakriti and the pure consciousness, the being, the Purusha. This distinction, even though it is not the whole truth of the matter, Sri Aurobindo accepts and says this is of a great practical value. There is this witnessing, observing consciousness, and then there is this, we can see within ourselves a whole biological machinery through which action happens. It is not the whole truth because nature has two voices. One is this, what is referred to as the prakriti. Other is the divine aspect of nature, the divine nature, the dimension of Shakti, which is not very much there in the Sankhyas. Therefore, it is an incomplete truth. But in the lower nature, in this Prakriti, this distinction between the Purusha and Prakriti, the witnessing consciousness and the executive mechanical nature is of great practical importance. And he also brought in how this soul in nature, this witnessing consciousness, when it identifies with the nature, the mechanical nature, and her three modes, sattva, rajas, tamas, and the dualities of pain, pleasure, joy, grief, success, failure, all that dualities. And all this brought in by a limiting ego and a desire driven life. That is where the whole suffering, whole limitation is. It is only when the Purusha step back from all this into its true nature and discover the true nature, the true Purusha, who is universal and transcendent, overstepping nature, then comes the possibility of mastery and enjoyment. And for that, one has to really step into that true being that is behind all this. From there, when that is, we can say the divine consciousness, living in God and acting in God, from there comes the experience of equality and oneness. That is the key to liberated action, a powerful action in the world. Now we will dive further where he is taking us in this journey. We are starting with paragraph number 19. But by what practical steps of self-discipline can we arrive at this consummation? So the consummation he's referring to is what we saw in the previous episode. The self-mastery and arriving at that enjoyment and powerful action that is free from the karmic entanglement. And he also clarified in the previous episode, karma is in the executive nature where the consequences are, whereas this liberated consciousness is free from that. And action can flow from there. So, by what practical steps of self discipline can we arrive at this consummation? This is the most important question. Okay, we agree. This is wonderful thing to arrive at, but now how? What part has been explained? Now he will be briefly bringing in the idea of how to arrive at it. The elimination of all egoistic activity and its foundation, the egoistic consciousness, is clearly the key to the consummation we desire. So the ego is the knot of the problem. And that egoistic consciousness, a consciousness that is limited, identified with the mechanical operations of Prakriti, identified with a particular thought, particular emotions, particular narrative, and shrunk into that small, narrow mold. And that is ego bound consciousness. It is the egoistic consciousness which says, I am this body, I, me, and myself, my limited set of experience, this is all what is. Now, elimination of all egoistic activity and its foundation. The foundation is the egoistic consciousness, is clearly the key to the consummation we desire. So we need to eliminate this egoistic activities and its foundation, which is the egoistic consciousness. And since in the path of works, action is the knot we have first to loosen. This entire part Sri Aurobindo is illustrating is the yoga of divine works. There is yoga of divine knowledge, there is yoga of love. That is not what he is elaborating in this particular part of the synthesis of yoga. It is the yoga of divine works. Therefore, since in the paths of works, action is the knot we have to first loosen. So, on the path of works, it is action, our bodily action, the action of the will operating through us. This is the primary knot that we need to loosen. We must endeavor to loosen it where it is centrally tied. So, where is it centrally tied? This knot of action, where it is bound. What is the knot? In desire and in ego. So, the action is bound by these two things, desire and ego. For otherwise, we shall cut only stray strands and not the heart of our bondage. So, there are many detailed operations of action spread across many finer nuances. But at the core of it, these are the two things, desire and ego. These are the two key things to loosen up so that the action itself is freed up. Otherwise, action gets bound, and this bondage comes from desire and ego. Let us read this line again. And since in the paths of works, action is the knot we have first to loosen, we must endeavor to loosen it where it is centrally tied, in desire and in ego. For otherwise, we shall cut only stray strands and not the heart of our bondage. These are the two knots of our subjection to this ignorant and divided nature, desire and ego sense. Nature is of multiplicity. There is division. I am separate from everything else. And also, it is bound by ignorance, a limited knowledge, limited will, a limited love. And of these two, desire has its native home in the emotions and sensations and instincts. So he's stripping layer by layer. One is action. Now, behind action, what is tying action? It is desire and ego sense. And behind desire, these are the three things that are the key to it: emotions, sensations, and instincts. And of these two, desire has its native home. Native home, the very source of desire, is in the emotions, sensations, and instincts. We need to clearly distinguish between emotions, sensations, and instincts. And from there, affects thought and volition. So we have our thought, we are thinking beings, human beings, mental beings capable of thought. Thought using language, visuals, all that are possible. But this thought is affected by emotions, sensations, instincts. Not only thought, but also volition. Our willing action, a conscious action, act of will. So we are capable of thought and will, but both thought and will, that conscious action, are affected by emotions, sensations, and instincts. And all of them are really the native home of desire. So, ego sense lives indeed in these movements. These movements are, first of all, there is movement of thought and volition, which is affected by desire, emotion, sensation, and instinct. So, ego sense lives indeed in these movements, but it casts its deeper roots also in the thinking mind and its will. And it is there that it becomes fully self-conscious. So we have these two things, desire and ego sense. Now, desire has its home in emotions, sensations, and instincts, whereas ego sense, even though it is involved and lives in these movements of emotions, sensations, and instincts, its roots are deeper in the thinking mind and its will, thought and will, where it becomes self-conscious. Ego is self-conscious, self-centered. I, me, and myself. That self-consciousness is very much part of the ego knot. Let me read this fully now. These are the two knots of our subjection to this ignorant and divided nature, desire and ego sense. And of these two, desire has its native home in the emotions and sensations and instincts. And from there affects thought and action. So thought and action are affected by that. Ego sense lives indeed in these movements, but it casts its deep roots also in thinking mind and its will, and it is there that it becomes fully self-conscious, a self-conscious ego. I am separate from everyone else, everything else. I am this, and this is my action. I am the one who is initiating this action. I am initiating this action because I want that, I desire that, and that desire is having its home in my emotions, my sensations, my instincts. And this whole sense of I, me, and myself, that ego sense, has its roots all the way into our mind and its will, where it becomes fully self conscious. I'm self conscious of my ambitions, my drives, my needs. And it lives in its emotions, sensations, and instincts. These are the twin obscure powers of the obsessing worldwide ignorance that we have to enlighten and eliminate. So there is a worldwide ignorance. It is not ignorance of this tiny little individual human being. It is across our species and it is across the nature. It's a worldwide ignorance. He uses the word ignorance with capital I. It is the lower nature obscurely seeking self mastery, seeking enjoyment, seeking freedom. But it lives in its ignorance in the narrow, ego bound, desire driven action. And that is where the problem is. And these two are to be eliminated, they are to be enlightened, these knots are to be loosened up. So these are the twin obscure powers of the obsessing worldwide ignorance. It's an obsession. When you are driven by your desires, which is having its home in emotions, sensations, and instincts, it's very obsessive. And it is a worldwide ignorance, and that we have to enlighten and eliminate. In the field of action, desire takes many forms. But the most powerful of all is the vital self's craving and seeking after the fruit of our works. In the field of action, desire takes many forms. But the most powerful of all is the vital self's craving for seeking after the fruit of our works. The fruit of our works. It is the very, very, very famous line from the Gita, karma phala, the fruit of our works. The vital self. We have within us these three layers of our instrumental nature: the physical nature, then there is a vital nature, then there is a mental nature. All of them have corresponding a mental self, the vital self, the physical self. And it is the vital self, the pranamaya deha, the pranamaya sharira, the pranamaya dimension of our being, that has the craving and seeking after the fruits of our works. All the action that I'm performing is to get a particular result for me. And I want that particular result. Karma phalam. So this is where the challenge is. The field of action. In the field of action, desire takes many forms. But the most powerful of all is the vital self's craving or seeking after the fruits of works. So there are many different forms desire takes. Out of all the forms, this is the central issue, that it has the vital self's craving for I want this particular result, and result is for me, for my own fulfillment. It is a personal desire driven fulfillment to which I seek after. The fruit we covet may be a reward of internal pleasure, or it may be the accomplishment of some preferred idea or some cherished will, or the satisfaction of the egoistic emotions, or else the pride of success of our highest hopes and ambitions. There is a whole lot of internal pleasures that we seek. I have an idea. Now, I want that idea to be accepted by others, to be implemented. And if that is accepted, implemented, I'm very happy because it is my idea. I came up with this idea and it has been accepted or it has been successfully rewarded. And I'm so happy because it is my idea. There is an internal pleasure to it because it is my preferred idea, accomplishment of some preferred idea, or a cherished will. I want this particular thing to be done. And if you don't obey and do it, then I will be upset, angry. Or if you do it, I'm very happy with you. You did it. I have a pleasure of that. Or satisfaction of egoistic emotions. Egoistic emotion of it's my baby's success that is making me so proud. It's my baby. It's my spouse. Or it is this or that related to me, and I have my pride, my happiness in seeing all that, everything that is centered around me. So the satisfaction of the egoistic emotions, or else the pride of success of our highest hopes and ambitions. When our highest hopes and ambitions, even when we identify with this or that leader or the movement in the society, and having a particular high ideal, you may even identify with a political party with a certain idealism. When that succeeds, oh, I am so happy with that. Pride of success of our highest hopes and ambitions need not even be through my own action. Even the party I have an affinity to is winning, and I feel so happy about it. So there is this whole range of internal pleasure that comes. The fruit we covet may be a reward of internal pleasure. What are these internal pleasures? It may be accomplishment of some preferred idea, or some cherished will, or the satisfaction of egoistic emotions, or else the pride of success of our highest hopes and emotions, hopes and ambitions. Now, that is internal pleasure. Then, or it may be an external reward. What are these external rewards? A recompense entirely material: wealth, position, honor, victory, good fortune, or any other fulfillment of vital or physical desire. This is the most common thing. Wealth. There is so much craving for money and material wealth and opulence in the world. The world economy is running, and if we look at the entire marketing of the products and services, and it is all about stimulating this desire for this or that material wealth or some position, social position, status, and the size and the positioning of your chair on the stage, or even in the auditoriums these days, you will find in the front row big sofas, highly huge in size, according to the position of the VIPs who are going to sit there. These are the stamp and indications of your status in the society. The size of your car, how costly your car is, how costly your clothing is, how costly your wristwatch studded with diamonds are. These are the important things the media reports. And we thoroughly enjoy that, invest in it. So wealth, position, honor, victory, good fortune. To the victory, honor, victory, good fortune. This person won a lottery, or won this competition or that competition, good fortunes of sudden wealth coming your way, you made so much money in stock market, and there is a huge applause for you for being so smart enough to invest in the right stock and earn money, or any other fulfillment of vital or physical desire, desiring a man, desiring a woman, the most beautiful woman, and getting her, or getting the most rich relationships, marital alliances, all those things. So an external reward, these wealth, position, honor, victory, good fortune, or any other fulfillment of vital or physical desire. Now, this is the normal human life. It is all about craving for some internal pleasures or some external rewards. So that the entire desire, which is acting through emotions, sensations, and instincts, and the ego sense. So the desire and ego sense together, working through emotions, sensations, instincts, having its primary need is the karma phala. All that I do is in order to get this reward, whether it is an internal pleasure or an external reward. I want that reward, and I am organizing my life, my actions, my activities. Everything is driven to get this particular result for me. That is where the central problem of the action is. This is of the nature of the ordinary human action. To get a big salary, to become rich, to become famous, to get this material wealth, that material wealth, build this relationship, have that thing getting accomplished, some or other idea getting executed because it is my idea. Or it may be an external reward, wealth, position, honor, victory, good fortune, all that. Always these satisfactions delude us. With the sense of mastery and the idea of freedom, while really we are harnessed and guided or ridden and whipped by some gross or subtle, some noble or ignoble figure of the blind desire that drives the world. We are lured by these things. In fact, you're tempted by the idea of mastery and freedom. If you have car, you have freedom to move and go wherever you want. You can see it in the advertisements of cars. Freedom. Enjoy the freedom of driving. Absolute free will. And some cars are presented as social status. Now, even nobler ideas are brought in. No, your car is occupying less space and it is eco-friendly. So you can be the man who is leading the new awareness of sustainability. So you can have pride in that. By owning this tiny little car. There was recently a case study of Tata Nano, the small car. And Ratan Tata was admitting that they made a mistake in the marketing. Because in the marketing, it was said it was the smallest car. Not smallest, cheapest car. But who wants to be owning the cheapest car? In the social status, owning a cheapest car is not a matter of pride. So people did not buy it even when the car was the smallest and it took very little space in parking and all that. So the marketing agencies are looking at the way the ego works, the human ego and its pride. So often the sense of mastery and idea of freedom and various notions by which you're lured into going after this or other action. Money will bring you freedom. Car will bring you freedom. This strategic alliance will give you greater mastery. All these are the lures by which you are brought into this, while really we are harnessed and guided or ridden and whipped, even whipped by some gross or subtle, some noble or ignoble figure of the blind desire that drives the world. Blind desire. Desire is blind. It's a power that drives. It is not so much the rational intelligence. It is rational intelligence serving desire. When you have a desire, then the rational intelligence is, when it is a servant, it will come up and give you all the reasons why you should have that position, that much money, this particular machinery, this particular social position, all that. But behind it is desire that drives the world, and you are craving for this or that, and it is a blind movement. Always these satisfactions delude us. That's the worst part of it. On one hand, it is always there on the edge. You're going to get it, you're going to get it, you're going to get it. Just last mile, the last mile, the last mile. And you may spend your whole life trying to get across that last mile of accomplishing that goal. On the other hand, you got it, you accomplished it, soon another one pops up. Or you realize that this is not it. There is something else that is missing. There is something else, another step to be taken. So you are going towards that particular acquirement. And you're lured and even whipped to go, because once you're on that wheel, you cannot step out of it. You have to take step after step because you have already made your investment. You don't want to lose your investment, and there is always one more step to take. And we can see that in various ways. The people who are, the cyber crime, people who lure you into these traps, you will say, come and do this, you will get this little reward, and then you get that little reward, and after that you come and you invest a little bit more, you get a bigger reward, and trap you deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of that desire, where eventually you see that you're getting drained and sucked into a vortex. You are just fodder for this blind force of desire that is driving the world. So always these satisfactions delude us. It's always temporary excitements and never a lasting joy, a lasting fulfillment. Always these satisfactions delude us with the sense of mastery and the idea of freedom. These are the major attractions, mastery and idea of freedom. While really we are harnessed and guided or ridden and whipped by some gross or subtle, some noble or ignoble figure of the blind desire that drives the world. Even sometimes very noble figures are luring you. Therefore, the first rule of action laid down by the Gita is to do the work that should be done without any desire for the fruit. Niṣkāma karma. Karma is action, kama is desire, niṣkāma is desireless action. So this phrase is very well known, niṣkāma karma. Not to desire fruit of your action. And even though it is so well known and established for thousands of years in India, we still see the masses are driven by desire. And the whole society and the entire economic system is driven and stimulating desire everywhere in every possible way, trying to kindle desire so that people are motivated into action. Therefore, the first rule of action laid down by the Gita is to do the work that should be done without any desire for the fruit, niṣkāma karma. A simple rule in appearance, and yet how difficult to carry out with anything like an absolute sincerity and liberating entireness. Sincerity. It's very easy to fool ourselves saying that my action is desireless and it is not for my good, it is for the world welfare. It's very, very easy to fool ourselves to become insincere because our intelligence is so smart, it can fool ourselves. It can tell lies to ourselves. And a liberating entireness, that action is entirely free from desire, a desireless action, free action. That actually liberates, but it is extremely difficult. It sounds so simple, and this is yet one of the most difficult thing to do. A simple rule in appearance, and yet how difficult to carry out with anything like an absolute sincerity. A partial sincerity, yes, a part of me is sincere, but an absolute sincerity, really difficult. And a liberating entireness, that entire freedom with which we can do. In the greater part of our action, we use the principle very little, if at all. And then, even mostly, as a sort of counterpoise to the normal principle of desire and to mitigate the extreme action of that tyrant impulse. Desire is a tyrant impulse. And we see that we are getting driven by this tyrant impulse. Whether I want to have this cappuccino or this pizza or this particular cloth or this particular jewelry or this particular car or this particular iPhone latest version, whatever it is. When this tyrant impulse is driving, then to mitigate it, to counter it, then you bring in the other side. The greater part of our action, we use the principle very little, if at all, and then even mostly as a sort of counterpoise to mitigate the normal principle of desire. So in some areas which it is not too strongly driven by desire, in those areas we begin to bring in as a counterpoise to this tyrant impulse which is otherwise driving. And in every individual, you see that they have mastery and freedom in certain areas. On other areas, they have this grip of desire or an impulse. It's very common. The light and shadow in the same individual. So desireless action is possible in some areas, whether it is of your educational needs or various other aspects of taking care of your people or all that, where you can become so generous, so free and loving and caring and selfless in the sense it is not for you, it is for other people and their good, larger good. But you will find in the same people, some areas, there is something very obscure, driven by, whipped by a form of desire that is quite obscure, a tyrant within. And in the dimension of when it comes to the vital education, this is one of the core things to understand, the light and shadow. Each individual has certain possibility of light. And you see that you have that noble aspiration in you and you are doing it. On the other side, you will see something that is contradicting everything that you wanted to do, a force that stains your light. And you find this contradiction within yourself, the shadow side. And it is really like a grip that whips you and pushes you, drives you to do things. So on one hand, there is this counterpoise of desireless action. On the other side, there is this tyrant impulse driving people. That's where inner life becomes a battle. You see your own nobility, your own aspiration. You also see your own darkness, your own limitation. These forces dragging you, gripping you downward into a vortex of suffering, shame, guilt. So in the greater part of our action, we use the principle very little, if at all, and then even mostly as a sort of counterpoise to the normal principle of desire and to mitigate the extreme action of that tyrant impulse. At best, we are satisfied if we arrive at a modified and disciplined egoism, not too shocking to our moral sense, not too brutally offensive to others. Quite humorous, sharp observations from Sri Aurobindo. So we try to arrive at certain balance, and this balance is a disciplined egoism. Getting rid of ego is a very difficult thing because the very roots of ego runs quite complex. There is a egoistic behavior and then ego itself, egoism and ego. Ego is that the sense of I, me, and myself separate from the rest, the sense of separation. And egoism is all the action, the activities that is centered around this central knot, central reference. So to refine this little ego, I, me, and myself, and refine it, educate it so that it is presentable and acceptable to myself first. I am quite okay with this. Even almost, I'm proud of my fineness, my gentlemanness, or my accomplishments. And so that is our own moral sense. We develop our own sense of morality. Within that framework, this ego is disciplined and brought and operationalized. And largely our education is brought in that context where your ego is morally justified and acceptable. And you're very comfortable with this is okay. This fellow is okay. And also it is not brutally offensive to other egos, other people. You don't want to trigger someone else's ego. And when somebody with a huge ego, if you offend that ego will make sure that you are thrashed and crushed and you have to go back and say sorry. Then that ego would feel happy. You must say sorry to me. So you don't want to offend all the eggshells that is all around you. Sometimes you find your own life is almost like walking on eggshells. You never know who is going to blow up, especially when you have many fragile egos all around you. And life is like a delicate balance, managing all the egos. In often teamworks, it is largely about managing the egos and emotions and desires and ambitions of people. Every manager knows that. You are actually managing egos, emotions, desires. So at best, we are satisfied if we arrive at a modified and self-disciplined egoism, not too shocking to our moral sense, not too brutally offensive to others. Not too brutally. A gentle offensiveness, it is okay. We know that a safe degree of offending somebody, this much offense this person, this ego will take. You don't go too brutally to offend because it can be very threatening, because egos are always in conflict. The conflicts in the world is because of this ego sense of I, me, and myself, my clan, my little belief system, my religion, my country, all that. So you don't want to offend brutally. And you develop a disciplined egoism so that the society can function and you can function in society among all these eggshells of egos that are around that can easily burst. So you find your way in that system. And to our partial self-discipline, we give various names and forms. It's a partial self-discipline. And we give to this various names and forms. We habituate ourselves by practice to the sense of duty. This is my duty, to a firm fidelity to a principle. I am a vegan. I am the believer of ahimsa, the non-violence principle. These are all kind of principles that we begin to hold on to show how good I have become, how much I am able to hold back my ego and become so compassionate by becoming a vegan or by becoming this non-violent person. And I'm practicing NVC, the non-violent communication. Look at me. So, to the sense of duty, to a firm fidelity to a principle, a stoical fortitude or a religious resignation, a stoical fortitude. The Stoics are the very ancient Greek philosophers who brought the reason as the guiding principle and reasoned ethical principles good for all. And based on that principle, I bring in the discipline, harsh discipline, to create a life of disciplined harmony. Or a religious resignation. I submit to certain religious principles of morality. A quiet or an ecstatic submission to God's will. That sounds very surprising, right? A quiet or an ecstatic submission to God's will. Because religions will teach you this is God's will, and you submit to that. Ecstatic submission to God's will, because this is what my religion is teaching me. You quietly and happily surrender to that. Now I will be saved, I will be in heaven, and no bad karma. I am obeying God's will, nothing else. So these are all the packages in which we put all our disciplined approaches to this whole problem of desire in action. So duty, yeah. This is my duty as a son, as a father, as a mother, as head of this organization, leader of this group, and I have duties. So based on that, you bring in discipline, or you have a fidelity to a principle, whether it is capitalism, communism, veganism, or giftivism, or whatever isms that you are holding on to. A stoic fortitude or a religious resignation, a quiet or an ecstatic submission to God's will, as taught by your religious teachers and all that. But it is not these things that Gita intends. So here we need to really distinguish. Often these texts like Bhagavad Gita is mistaken for religious textbook, Hindu religious textbooks. And these are the greatest mistakes of modern scholarship, and even universities classify and put these things into this is religious study or philosophical study. Predominantly religious schools of religions will study these things, but Gita is not a religious text, and it doesn't mean it is beyond all these things. So it is not these things that Gita intends. These things are the duty, the principle, the religious resignation, all that. That's not at all what Gita is looking at. Useful though they are in their place, there is no denial of the usefulness of following like duty, responsibilities, fidelity to principle, religious resignations, the stoic self-discipline. All that, it has its place. There is no denial of it, but it is partial. Gita aims at something absolute, unmitigated, uncompromising, a turn, an attitude that will change the whole poise of the soul. So Gita is aiming at something radical, It is not about duty. It is not about an ethical principle. It is not about religious resignation, stoic principles, nothing. There is an uncompromising, unmitigated, absolute commitment, a shift that is demanded by the Gita, a turn, an attitude that will change the whole poise of the soul. There is a soul within, the observing self, the witness within, the experiencer within. There is a fundamental shift in the poise of the soul that is required. This is what is Gita demanding. Not the mind's control of vital impulse as its rule, but the strong immobility of an immortal spirit. Very critical distinction to note. It is not mind's control of vital impulse is its rule. Not the mind's control of vital impulse is its rule, but the strong immobility of an immortal spirit. The whole problem of action driven by desire and craving for the results of desire, animated by the vital self's craving, this is not mastered by the mind bringing its control, the control of the mind. Whatever be the ethical principles, philosophies, they have limitation. They cannot truly master the vital self and its craving for the results of its action, or the very principle of desire rooted in the vital. Mind cannot do it. Period. This has to be understood. This is absolutely central to the Gita. We often reduce the Gita into mental, moral principles of duties, responsibilities. It is not what Gita is teaching. The poise of the soul has to shift. What is that shift? Shift is to the strong immobility of an immortal spirit. There is an immobile spirit within and all around in the universe, and the doorway is already there within us. The witness within us, when we go deep within to identify with that pure being, pure awareness, the very ground of our being, one of the very fundamental first quality we discover, encounter, is the immobility, immobile self, unmoving, absolute stillness of the being. You see, this is not a moral teaching. It is an experiential development of the inner being. There is the moving side of the Prakriti. All the thoughts are moving, all the emotions are moving, sensations are moving, instincts are moving, body is moving. All these are Prakriti in her mechanical cycles of operations. Behind that, there is this witnessing Purusha. Remember, Sri Aurobindo had brought in this distinction, Prakriti and Purusha. And in the Gita, we can see Sri Krishna referring to the Purusha and Prakriti. This Purusha, the being, again, let me remind once again, Purusha is not man or a male. It is there regardless of your gender, whatever be the body type. There is a witnessing consciousness in you, pure being in you. When you go deep into that being and identify that being and liberate that being, step out of the activities of the Prakriti, step out of the thought, step out of emotions, step out of sensations, out of instincts, out of bodily, instinctive, habitual actions, there is a witnessing consciousness. And as you dive deeper into it, you will discover the very first thing is immobility, stillness. That is the fundamental shift Gita is asking. Sthita prajna, if you are to discover that, this is the shift that is required. So let me read this crucial point once again. It is not these things that Gita intends. These things are duty, fidelity to principles, social, stoic fortitude, religious resignation. None of this is what Gita is asking. It is not these things that Gita intends. Useful though they are in their place. It aims at something absolute, unmitigated, uncompromising, a turn, an attitude that will turn the whole poise of the soul. Not the mind's control of vital impulse is its rule. Let me repeat it. Not the mind's control of vital impulse is its rule, but the strong immobility of an immortal spirit. Strong immobility of an immortal spirit. This has to be unearthed from within us. What a powerful ground of being do we have within us. We have to identify, become that immobile spirit within, so that the mastery of the Prakriti can begin. And this is not an intellectual principle, adherence to a principle, adherence to a duty. It is a fundamental shift he's talking. The whole poise has to shift towards that. The test it lays down is, here is the Gita, the test it lays down is an absolute equality of the mind and the heart to all results, to all reactions, to all happenings. An absolute equality. This is the test of the Gita. Without that equality, what Gita proposes cannot be arrived at. An absolute equality of the mind and the heart to all results, to all reactions, to all happenings. If good fortune and ill fortune, if respect and insult, if reputation or obloquy, if victory and defeat, if pleasant event and sorrowful event, leaves us not only unshaken but untouched, free in the emotions, free in the nervous reactions, free in the mental view, not responding with the least disturbance or vibration in any spot of the nature, then we have the absolute liberation to which the Gita points us, but not otherwise. There is a beautiful imagery in the Gita when Arjuna asks Sri Krishna about how would someone who has established walk, talk, act in life. The imagery given was like an ocean into which all the rivers are pouring. Ocean remains calm, immobile, achala pratishtam, and it will not be overwhelmed by the rivers pouring into it. So a liberated man, Sthita Prajna, who is established in that equality of the spirit, immobile ground of the being upon which you are established, when it is opened infinitely wide and when you become the infinity, the whole world and energies of nature can pour in from all sides through all people, yet you remain immobile, calm, vast, infinite. untouched, untroubled. Your mental view is not colored and distorted. Your nervous system is not reacting to what is pouring in. Your emotions are not reacting and getting entangled with what is pouring in. That is equality asked by the Gita. And this is something to be cultivated when we liberate our being and arrive at that inner freedom, unshaken, untouched. No matter what happens, whether you are respected or insulted, this is very common. When someone is praising you, you are going gaga, so happy. Then comes the nasty comment, and you're so upset. You're so troubled by a criticism. Especially the moment you step out into a public life, engage with a larger life around, you will receive praise as well as insult. And if you are operating from the ego, you are operating from the desire driven action, it is natural that when you're praised, you will feel so happy. And the moment a criticism comes, you are upset, irritated, angry. It is an indication that your action is driven by these two things, desire and ego sense. Similarly, whether you have victory or defeat, reputation or obloquy, pleasant event or sorrowful event, it doesn't matter what, all these dualities, this is part of life. But can you handle the entire life with all these complexities with absolute equality? And success is the time to be most careful, because that is when your hidden ego and ambitions will flare up. Arrogance will show up. All the hidden stuff, all the facade of humility that generally people do carry, a well-trained humility born out of an intellectual understanding, all that facade quietly falls off when victory comes your way, power comes your way. When you are defeated in your failure, when your poverty, it's very easy to be humble, show humility and all that. It is when you have power, when you have victory, watch out. That is where you see the ego in action. And spiritual circles in particular, it is when you get some siddhis, some inner power, some sense of mastery, there comes the hidden vital cravings, ambitions, ego, drives that were submerged, that were behind, they just were waiting. Now you have the power. And it inflates the ego, grips the seeker. Even if you have cultivated a sattvic ego, it's playing the role of, I'm so humble. Behind it, all that it can hide. So none of this are going to take us there. And we must be unshaken, untouched, free in the emotions, free in the nervous reactions, free in the mental view, not responding with the least disturbance or vibration in any spot of the nature. Our nature, any spot, whether it is in the physical, in the vital, or the mind, any of these layers, not a single tiny reaction. Because every reaction will lead to entanglement and corresponding consequence, karmic bondage. That which is free from karma is the immobile spirit within, that is inactive. Action is in the active dynamic nature, in the prakriti. when we are able to free up and stand back into this absolute immobility of the spirit, then we have the absolute liberation to which the Gita points us, but not otherwise. The tiniest reaction is a proof that the discipline is imperfect and that some part of us accepts ignorance and bondage as its law and clings still to the old nature. So the tiniest reaction is a proof. So all that we need to do is just observe ourselves, see if there is a reaction to external situations, and entangled reactions, and unconscious habitual reactions. That will show the crack, the proof. The discipline is imperfect, and that some part of us accepts ignorance and bondage as its law. There will be reactions. We will see the entire physical vital machinery reacting to things. But what is important is, are you justifying it? Are you identified with it? Are you accepting it? When you see that your mind is justifying a reaction because so and so, this or that person did this or that thing, therefore I am angry, therefore I am upset. Cause is out there. It is not my fault. I have the right to be angry. I have the right to be sad. I have the right to be upset. You're entirely lost in the machinery of nature. So all that justification has to end. You must see there is a reaction. There's an entanglement. And from that whole layers that are reacting to external situations, you step back and observe. Become the witness, the Purusha, the observing consciousness, the pure consciousness. You are aware that there is reaction. But you are not the reaction. You are the one who is aware of the reaction. Immobile, vast and free. That's where the freedom is. The tiniest reaction is a proof that the discipline is imperfect and that some part of us accepts ignorance and bondage as its law and clings still to the old nature. Our self-conquest is only partially accomplished. It is still imperfect or unreal in some stretch or part or smallest spot of the ground of our nature. So there is a conquest part by part. Different parts of our being are freed up from this habitual unconscious reactive nature, desire-driven reactive nature, egocentric reactive nature. And we extend it to various parts, to the tiniest little region that still need that transformation. So our self-conquest is only partially accomplished. It is still imperfect or unreal in some stretch or part or smallest spot of the ground of our nature. And that little pebble of imperfection may throw down the whole achievement of the yoga. That tiny little pebble or the grain of imperfection still buried, hidden in our regions that are unlit, they can overthrow the whole accomplishments of yoga. So therefore, a total perfection is required in the mind, in the vital, in the physical. An integral perfection that is absolute necessary, because even a tiniest imperfection can overthrow the entire accomplishment. There are certain semblances of an equal spirit which must not be mistaken for the profound and vast spiritual equality which the Gita teaches. So there is a spiritual equality, and there are other lesser versions of it, which is not spiritual equality, but they resemble spiritual equality. So there are certain resemblances of an equal spirit which must not be mistaken for the profound and vast spiritual equality which the Gita teaches. There is an equality of disappointed resignation. Like you develop certain numbness because you may come across a whole lot of resistances or failures or oppositions to all that you wanted to do, and you develop certain resignation and certain numbness, a disappointed numbness towards life, and you become kind of equal to all things. Now I have arrived at my equality, and that is utterly nonsense. There is an equality of disappointed resignation or an equality of pride or an equality of hardness and indifference. All these are egoistic in their nature. So someone might appear to be equal in all things, but underlying thing is an egoistic formation of whether it is indifference, hardness, pride, or disappointed resignation. All this can parade frontally as a movement of a presence of equality. It is not. It is bound by ego, shallow in depth, just a superficial hardness. Inevitably, they come in the course of the sadhana, but they must be rejected or transformed into the true quietude. So, in the course of sadhana, definitely we will come across all these things inside us, like the so called vairagya. Vairagya gives a sense of now I am detached from everything. Nothing is interesting to me. I have become equal soul to everything, untouched by all this. That is not the equality that is being hinted here. So they must be rejected or transformed into the true quietude. There is too, on a higher level, the equality of the stoic, equality of a devout resignation, or a sage detachment, the equality of a soul aloof from the world and indifferent to its doings. There are higher forms of this equality. It is still not what Gita is saying. Gita is bringing about the spirits, immortal spirit that is capable of action in the world and enjoyment in the world. That is very different thing than equality of the stoic. Stoic is the one who is holding the lid by the power of reason, mental will, or the equality of a devout resignation. You're surrendering to some or other religious moral principles, or a sage detachment. You're detached from life and you're untouched by things. You're not necessarily an enjoyer of life and thriving in creation, creative action in the world, but a detached sage. Equality of a soul aloof from the world and indifferent to its doings. A soul that has just become pure witness, indifferent to the action happening in the world because the world is an illusion. What is there to get engaged with it? Even that is not what the Gita is teaching. Gita is teaching action in the world, a liberated action in the world. These two are insufficient. That is, the equality of the stoic, the equality of a devout resignation, or a sage of detachment, the equality of a soul aloof from the world and indifferent to its doings. All these are insufficient. First approaches they can be, but they are at most early, soul phase only, or imperfect mental preparations for our entry into the true and absolute self-existent wide evenness of the spirit. There is a true and absolute self-existent wide evenness of the spirit. Equality arises out of that evenness of the spirit, absolute self-existent. It has no dependency on anything that is happening in the world, in the manifest world. It is entirely free from it. It is self-existent. It has an absolutely infinite, wide evenness. Towards this, we can have steps of the soul. That is where what we referred before come into the picture. Or that stoic self-discipline, or the sagely detachment, all that are part of the growth process. First approaches they can be, but they are at most early soul phases only, or imperfect mental preparations. It is the mental being preparing itself, liberating itself from the entanglement in the vital and physical nature, and beginning to experience the detachment, ability to observe impartially, be free from the entanglement, but it is still the mental preparations for our entry into the true and absolute self-existent, wide evenness of the spirit. That is the direction in which we are growing. But how then shall we continue to act at all? If we have this immobile ground of being, how do we act? For ordinarily, the human being acts because he has a desire, or feels a mental, vital, or physical want or need. He is driven by the necessities of the body, by the lust of riches, honor, or fame, or by a craving for personal satisfactions of the mind or the heart, or a craving for power or pleasure. That's our normal operations, driven by desire or the mental needs, physical needs, all that is the normal drive. Ordinarily, human being acts because he has desire or feels a mental, vital, or physical want or need. He is driven by the necessities of the body, by the lust of riches, honors, or fame, or by a craving for the personal satisfactions of the mind or the heart, or a craving for power or pleasure. Or he is seized and pushed about by a moral need, or at least the need or the desire of making his ideas or his ideals or his will, his party, his country, his gods prevail in the world. This is the normal operation. I want my God to win, my country to win, my party to win, my will to win, my ideals to win, my ideas to be executed, or my moral constructs. All these are there as a framework for the normal, ordinary action. If none of these desires or any other must be the spring of our action, it would seem as if all incentive or motive power has been removed and action itself must necessarily cease. So without all these, how are we going to act? If none of these desires or any other must be the spring of our action, it would seem as if all incentive, every incentive and motivation for action is removed, even power has been removed, then necessarily action must cease. So from where will action spring? The Gita replies with its third great secret of the divine life. All action must be done in a more and more God-word and finally God-possessed consciousness. So initially action that is offered to the God, it's a God-word action. Gradually it is a God-possessed action. The divine consciousness take possession of the instruments and action unfolds through that. Our works must be a sacrifice to the divine, an offering to the divine, and in the end a surrender of all our being, mind, will, heart, sense, life, and body to the One, must make God love, God service our only motive. So, for a Karma Yogi of the Gita, it is serving the divine the only motive. serving the divine consciousness, who takes eventually the entire possession of the instrumental nature and act through you. So the works must be a sacrifice to the divine, an offering to the divine, a sacred offering to the divine, every little thing that we do. And in the end, a surrender of our being, mind, will, heart, sense, life, and body to the one. Must make God love and God service our only motive. There is no other motive for a Karma Yogi. You are moved by love for God and serving God. Whatever be the definition of God that you are holding within you. This transformation of the motive force and the very character of works is indeed its master idea. This transformation of the motive force, we are replacing desire as the motive force, and desire for the results, that is replaced with this God service, God love. The transformation of the motive force and the very character of works is indeed the master idea. It is the foundation of its unique synthesis of works, love, and knowledge. It is upon this foundation Gita synthesizes not just works, but love and knowledge. It is a synthesized, integral approach to spirituality. In the end, not desire, but the consciously felt will of the eternal remains as the sole driver of our action and the sole originator of its initiative. We begin to feel consciously the will of the eternal, and that becomes the sole driver of our action and the sole originator of its initiative. So we do not even initiate action. We feel the divine will, and from that source, there is an origination of action. Our entire instrumental nature is purified and surrendered. The whole being is surrendered. Ego is dissolved. Desire has been purified, transformed. And you are a passive instrument, a channel through which the divine consciousness can pour itself into the world. And that is where you become a perfect vessel, a perfect instrument, a nimitta matram. And that is the freedom we can arrive at. In the end, not desire, but the consciously felt will of the eternal remains as the sole driver of our action and the sole originator of its initiative. Equality, renunciation of all desire for the fruits of works, action done as sacrifice to the Supreme Lord of our nature and all nature. These are the three first Godward approaches in the Gita's way of Karma Yoga. These are the three things: equality, renunciation of all desire for the fruit of our works, action done as the sacrifice to the Supreme Lord of our nature and all nature. These are the three first Godward approaches in the Gita's way of Karma Yoga. It is so simple when it is distilled this way: equality, renunciation of all desire for the fruits of our works, an action done as a sacrifice to the Supreme Lord of our nature and of all nature. This is the Gita's way. So with that, we come to the end of this chapter, Self-Surrender in Works, the way of the Gita. Thank you for being with me in this journey. Please do subscribe to this channel and also ensure that you have clicked on the bell icon so that you get notification. Please do share your insights. See you next week with the next chapter. Thank you.